Hello, this is Dan Winter. It is South France, late November 2020, and this film is about using a new synthesis of interstellar history, context of the human civilization on Earth and human populations in our galaxy, as a context to understand the science of what humans have to offer on an interstellar scale, having to do with the physics of Kundalini and bliss and how auras become plasma projective. This video is in part a follow-up to a bit of a viral hit. Thank you to Neil Gower, Portal to Ascension, the recent films we made on the physics of what is ascension. An interview with Alan Steinfeld. Those videos were extremely well received. Thank you. And so there's a lot of interest in understanding the physics of ascension as it relates to the physics of Kundalini and bliss. And the point for this film is the relationship with which that understanding gives to an updated version of interstellar history of humans and what humans have value for on an interstellar stage. I'd also like to thank Jordan River, Spirit Science video series. The film we made with them was also extremely well received. Thank you. And I want to thank both Neil Gower, Portal to Ascension, and Jordan River, Spirit Science, for inviting me to do an updated series on this, the physics, the science of Kundalini and practice, as it relates to our place in interstellar history and the significance. And this film is a kind of a warm-up or a précis or a prequel to further films to be made with them. Thank you. But I thought that we would actually make a start here because I wanted to see how much we could share directly. So what we're going to do here is, you know that I have been working for more than 20 years on a detailed experiential interstellar history of humans on Earth, with many, many personal connections I've had with the Andromedans through Alex Collier and elsewhere, and now the Pleiadians through Med, Robert Morningsky, Marciniak with the Pleiadians I taught there, etc. So I have many years of detailed personal work on the interstellar history. Now, I'm pleased to see that Gaia TV has undertaken to do some serious work in this area. For example, Randy Kramer, Jason Rice, Robert Wood's presentations on Gaia TV on the Secret Space program. These people have been through hypnosis and lie detectors, and I believe they're real and very useful. Obviously, limitations there are failure to understand the deep science, and that's why I'm here, actually. In contrast, I tend to agree, I would say gently, that with my old friend Jay Widener, we started Gaia TV together with Yurka there. He is critical of Corey Goode with good reason. I think and even David Wilcock, everybody loves him, but sadly a bit naive perhaps, particularly, for example, not even recognizing what he calls the Blue Sphere Alliance. In fact, the Andromedans travel in blue spheres, hint, and it's my personal telepathic interaction with Visayas and with the Andromedans, thanks originally to Alex Collier and more recently with Med of Mediator Medias. Our friend here who's been working with the Pleiadians and many others for years, and we're going to mention their websites in a minute. So, point being that I feel there are many people now working on interstellar history of humans. And by the way, physicists are absolutely clear. Inhabitable star systems have to be in the millions. No physicist denies that now. And there's recent astrophysics articles saying there must be at least 20 or 30 contactable extraterrestrial civilizations. And this is conventional conservative physics saying that, where all our sources now have gone much further, obviously, and have reported multiple sources had confirmed that are on the order of 10 to 100,000 humanoid-type civilizations in our galactic quadrant alone, and we have more than one confirmation of that. So it's going to take humans a while to get up to speed, and recognize the significance of the human civilization on Earth. And by the way, it's not our jets and our technology. Sorry. No, we're in the Stone Ages without knowing why objects fall to the ground. We can't even travel except by using dinosaurs farting. So no, the humans need to be human about need to be humble about many things. But my point being is that there is something we don't need to be humble about, and that is the true power of the human civilization, even perhaps here, having to do with ensoulment, capability for bliss, kundalini, and plasma projection, and the resulting psychokinesis, what you might call ensoulment, which is sadly lacking in so many of the extraterrestrial information sources. For example, the Pleiadians. These sources, while wonderful and useful, they have agendas. And in order to understand those agendas, it's necessary to get the bigger picture and context. And that's part of the reason for this film, is to try to put together this story in a new and synthetic way. Now, I decided that for this film, well, first of all, I will be using this article called Inceptive Cyborg, Galactic History, Setting the Stage for Kundalini Ascension Physics. And that article is at fractalfield.com/fusionintheBlood/inceptivecyborg.html. You'll see why in a minute. They were using the inceptive cyborg effect. It's a capacitive coupling effect to modulate the direction of genetic evolution at one phase, as indicated by the terracotta figurines so famous in Mexico that Phyllis wrote about. But we'll get to that in a moment. That article, by the way, about Inceptive Cyborg is at goldenmean.info/DNA Manifesto. But big picture. So I've decided that before we go into our review, a rapid, brief history of time kind of review, that there were three parts of the physics that you need to understand before we can even begin the interstellar history. And sadly, these other people like Randy Kramer, Jason Rice, and Robert Woods, who are doing a great job with Gaia describing interstellar interactions. The reason that is so woefully incomplete is because of their complete lack of understanding of the following physics. And you will be armed with that physics in order then to understand the interstellar context here. And that is specifically the physics of three things. How longitudinal waves propagate electromagnetically, and sometimes called scalar rotortional, and why that is a gravity wave, and why that's the only solution to where you go when you lucid dream and when you die, and the collective unconscious, and heaven, and all of that physics. And the only way you get the kind of aura, the ba from the ka, as we've said, to take something through death. So that longitudinal wave propagation, just a little bit more on that story will help set the context for the whole discussion. Second thing you need to understand is it has to do with the physics of how the pyramids, for example, Giza, were a global energy generation distribution system, and it obviously installed by the Federation of Planets for the reason of having a planet-wide energy distribution, energy without wires, which Tesla failed and misunderstood. And that physics then is going to give you the key, finally, to the physics of portals. Like Randy Kramer is describing going through these portals, but frankly doesn't appear to have a clue electromagnetically how they work. And that is essential to the understanding of galactic history. So those three things, that's going to be the preview intro physics here. This could be a fast ride. I hope it's fun. So first, now I'm going to dig out our pictures of longitudinal waves, which many of you have seen many times before, and hopefully you've seen this enough times that it's actually boring by now. But we just need to go over this briefly one more time. So remember when we were talking about how longitudinal waves propagate and are generated? This is our favorite slide in that regard. Okay, let's see if we can bring this up into the window here. I'm going to bring this over. All right, and bring this up. So the longitudinal wave is generated when the up and down wave motion of the electromagnetic field is converted. In other words, most of our electromagnetic energy simply is, we're using the transverse component of the electromagnetic wave, which is simply the up and down motion of the slinky, to transmit information. All of our radio, communications, all of that, we use the transverse component of the electromagnetic wave. However, under ideal circumstances, when that up and down motion transverse EMF encounters the correct geometry of vortex, literally the pine cone, you see here the picture of the caduceus on the side of a pine cone, then that inertia travels down that vortex, and it's called translation of vorticity, literally the L as in Elohim, as in those who can make that L can lucid dream and be something, and those who don't, unfortunately, don't take anything through death. They don't have a soul. So the people who get coherent with longitudinal propagation are the people called Elohim. You know, they're the ones who have the ba from the ka. And so how that happens in your aura is that when the inertia goes down that vortex on the pine cone, the inertia translates its vorticity from the up and down motion slowly down the pine cone and comes out the tip of the toothpaste tube, as it were, squirted at exactly the diameter of Planck, into a longitudinal wave tuned to Planck, sometimes called a gravity wave. Now that, and sometimes called incorrectly, scalar or torsional. Now when I was teaching in psychotronics 30 to 40 years ago, and makes me feel young, we were very interested in the fact that if you take a piece of wire and hook both ends to your car battery, it'll blow up in your hand and half kill you. But if you take that same chunk of wire and wind it into a caduceus and touch both ends to a car battery, it stays cool, but if you point it at somebody, they feel sick to their stomach. At that point, we began looking at how you made a longitudinal wave and what it did, but we didn't have a clue at that point. And these people were walking around calling it scalar waves, which unfortunately is really the bad terminology, because scalar has a completely different meaning in all of physics, scalar tensors, etc. So we want to use the proper language, which is longitudinal EMF propagation. At any rate, once that compressional wave is traveling with longitudinal coherence, like this, compression, sound waves, for example, are longitudinal compression. The old example is, you know, in a tsunami, the tsunami wave is traveling faster than a jet plane in the ocean, and your boat is on the surface and you don't know that it went underneath you. Well, that's similar to a longitudinal wave going through a Faraday cage. It doesn't matter. It goes right through. Exactly the reason why Ingo Swann could heat that thermistor with his mind at a distance through a Faraday cage, because that's longitudinal interferometry. That's how your brain works. And it's the only physics of action at a distance, and physics better get up to speed on this pretty soon if they ever want their fusion physics to work. Longitudinal interferometry is the only way to get action at a distance, and the following is why and how. So when that longitudinal wave propagates, it's a compressional wave, and it'll go right through a metal cage like a Faraday cage. But what it will not go through is another compressional node where there's enough compression symmetry to set up again that vortex that interchanges longitudinal with transverse inertia. In other words, you're propagating these longitudinal waves. Tom Bearden correctly called it the Russian woodpecker, where you saw this pattern in the clouds halfway over the USA. They were doing weather control with longitudinal waves. He blamed the Russians. Well, okay. Point being that when longitudinal waves cross each other at a distance, they create a compressional node. Now that node is identical with what's happening in the dodecaecosa Earth grid, the compression points, the place where Bruce Cathy measured a reduced amount of nuclear critical mass related to the places where nuclear radiation would be reduced, because there is a centripetal node of compression. And those are the same places where Kozyrev measured the nanoteslas of the Earth grid magnetic cross lines to predict in advance where you could set up a Kozyrev mirror, which is really a microwave transmitter. It's a metal cylinder tuned to the microwave, which is the physics of human telepathy, DNA, radio, etc. And you had to put those Kozyrev mirrors, those metal tubes, at those magnetic line cross points, so you did not get the military quality telepathy every time. That's Kozyrev and Karakov, and that's good intro to the physics. So at these magnetic line node cross points, you get a still point. Now, at this point, we were supposed to have a fun picture. You know all those pictures of the dodecaecosa Earth grid. Okay, so there's all those pictures. We have half a dozen of them. Here's the classic picture of the dodecaecosa Earth grid. Okay, so now we know that the pyramids are located at these nodes, and these nodes have to do with catching gravity waves as well, which Tom Bearden correctly described the physics of inherent longitudinal EMF property of gravity waves because the implosive charge compression at those nodes is the physics of gravity, literally charge implosion, which ignites a longitudinal wave, is also the name for the principle of what is gravity. A conjugate interferometry is a name for what's happening inside hydrogen, and the reason hydrogen makes gravity, which is the equation I wrote, proving Planck times integer exponents golden ratio equals radii of hydrogen. The only reason hydrogen makes gravity is because it's fractal. And most physicists knew in advance that fractality causes gravity, but had never even thought about what a fractal electric field is. Well, guess what? Hydrogen is a pretty good example, which actually looks just like the dodecaecosa on the right. Point being that now you have a nodal array where these compression nodes, this longitudinal interferometry, can line up and continue the distribution array. The point is that the longitudinal propagation can only continue efficiently if the pattern, the geometry, basically is, and I have the goldenmean.info/kit, Star Mother kit here. Thanks to Tufan Guven for sharing these things as well at geometric models. That the dodecaecosa array is the only possible propagation geometry for longitudinal interference, because at only those nodes can you get infinite harmonic series of golden ratio, which is the only way to do infinite constructive wave interference. We have the equations. This is all published, fractalfield.com/mathematics of fusion. If you don't use golden ratio, you do not achieve maximum constructive interference. It's simple. That's not woo-woo. That is solid, proven, conventional physics now by wave equations, thanks to our work. Golden ratio is the mathematics of perfected wave interference, constructive, and therefore the only solution to maximum possible compression, non-destructive compression, which was Einstein's name for what a gravity wave is, was infinite non-destructive compression. But of course he didn't know what a fractal was and had never thought about a fractal field. So now we've got this nodal array, which is the stellation of dodecaecosa, the only possible three-dimensional fractal, and the only definition of what is a fractal field, golden ratio, integer exponents times Planck, going on forever, as it were. And that is the reason why DNA, Earth grid, zodiac, and the arrangement of masses in the universe is proven by astrophysics, is a dodecahedron, Steiner's foundation stone, because that is the only possible geometry of longitudinal compressional coherence, longitudinal interferometry, non-destructive. So this is DNA radio, this is portals, this is stargates, this is... Now, let's do an example of that to do the last part of our necessary introduction physics here. The physics of how the pyramids were used as a wireless energy distribution grid for the whole planet. Now, if you read in this, this series, this is from... originally Arcturus Probe, and then the book 2/3 by David Myers and David Percy. And we're describing here the physics of a pyramid as a gravity diode. So we have this famous animation. This is me, and I'm nutate pumping a gyroscope such that if I spin that gyroscope in my hand like this and feel the resistance correctly, I can pump and increase the speed of that gyroscope with a pump wave. Well, this is the relationship why planetary spin have to be golden mean ratio embedded in zodiacal spin because it embeds and stabilizes the charge implosion named stable gravity. That's why it's called, pyramids were called a gravity diode. So in other words, if you take golden ratio exactly times Planck, you get the Venus year, the Earth year, the galactic year, the precessional year. And the reason is simple, because the little spin has to embed non-destructively in the big spin, or you don't get the charge implosive cascade called stable gravity. So not only is the geometry of masses in the universe dodecahedral, but that cascade of harmonics, which I proved is all golden ratio times Planck, is what allows efficient distribution of charge, what you might call heaven or planes of Sharon, and energy radio. So then in that same book, which is, and here's the other picture from that book, yes, the book 2/3 by David Myers and David Percy, they called the pyramid a Hummer. Now, we were working with Sam in Bosnia with the Bosnian pyramid there, thanks to my partner Valerie and Patrick Bauty, who went there many times. And you can see the power spectra we made of the capacitance of the pyramid there in Bosnia, which is the technology we use for life force measure in general and measuring the electric field of living architecture to prove which architect should get a paycheck according to which building causes a seed to grow at flameinmind.com/lifeforce. So point being that when Patrick went to Bosnia, and you get this whole line of tourists that have just arrived because they all know that you come there and you get rejuvenated. Hello? And so people are going there for similar to Therapy. Charge implosion, phase conjugation, is time reversal, neg entropy. And the physics reason was because the low frequency harmonics of that pyramid, of course you get the Schumann harmonic series, but he got the 53 hertz. Now, we have measured that all over the world, and it's true. And we figured out why all these pyramids have a 53 hertz component, whereas Med and the Palladians are saying, well, when the ETs installed the now breaking down nuclear generators inside the metal hollow synthetic moon made by the Andromedans, that they wanted to quarantine the local bad guys, the Dracos and the Kingu reptilians here. What were they doing with a 50 hertz generator inside the moon? What did that have to do with the quarantine? How did that mess up the stargates and portals? Well, this is an intro to that physics, if you can just stay with me for a moment. So we knew that 50 hertz was exactly golden ratio times Planck. It's actually, if you take multiply Planck by golden ratio and integer exponents, you get 49.97 hertz. And it turns out if you use 50 hertz, your carbon will grow, you can make fullerenes, and you can transform the planet with carbon nano. And if you use 60 hertz, you're screwed. Well, sorry, USA. And it turns out that 50 hertz is the most common mentioned frequency in all of the medical literature on healing cancer. Hello? It ain't 60. No. So we knew that, the harmonic series for charge implosion, therefore stargates and portals, and by the way, how we feed Therapy.net, that same low frequency harmonic cascade, including 50 and 80 hertz golden ratio Planck. So what the heck are we doing measuring 53 hertz in all these pyramids? And actually in my living room. But then we figured that out too, because the actual Schumann harmonic cascade that would be pure fusion implosion would be about 7.23 hertz in that cascade, where the actual Schumann resonance, in other words, Enki, Thoth, who were designing the Earth at that time, the Schumann resonance is related to the speed of light divided by the circumference of the Earth. And so it comes out to about 7.83 hertz dominant harmonic in the cascade, instead of 7.23, which would be golden ratio times Planck. So the Schumann cascade, which is what determines the brainwave alpha, which is what determines bliss, is a harmonic cascade which is almost, but not exactly, pure fusion implosion, origin of neg entropy, golden ratio times Planck. And that difference between the real Schumann 7.83 versus the theoretically correct Schumann about 7.2 something, that difference is the difference, if you just do golden ratio a few times, between 50 and 53 hertz. Exactly. Hello. So our measurements were confirmed. We know the physics. Now, what does that have to do with the ETs setting up interferometry to prevent stargates and portals to trap the the expansionist Orion and Draco, Uru, and Kingu reptilians on this Earth with these ancient, now breaking nuclear generators inside the moon, the quarantine frequency bands. So that's now you have a little context. So before we go into that history, let me just check now if you understand how not the main, but one of the main functions electrically of the Great Pyramid was to generate electric power for distribution around the planet. What Tesla failed at, but what they obviously succeeded at, energy without wires. Obviously, if you don't know what longitudinal interferometry is, you don't qualify for that conversation. So, for example, putting those light bulbs around the field around your high voltage Tesla coil, if you don't know where the longitudinal nodes are, you ain't never going to get power without wires. So, sorry, all you Tesla freaks. You got to get it right. It's the longitudinal nodes that enable power distribution without wires. And by the way, it's another case of get fractal or get dead. It ain't going to work if it's not looking like a rose or a fractal, which is stellate, dodeca, pent, golden ratio, etc., etc. So, do you now understand how the Great Pyramid is a power distribution generator for the whole planet? No, you don't yet, do you? Well, a few more clues. The Great Pyramid is profoundly piezoelectric. Most of the stones have a useful dielectric constant. And the reason they call it a Hummer, and the reason why it's a rejuvenation effect, is because that charge implosive cascade, if it allows a drain hole out through the Planck threshold called access to ground. All grounding is access to a fractal, whether you're a psychologist or an electrical engineer. It's the same thing, because it's an access to perfected charge distribution, which is to say, touch wood. And so that's why even Gosha, who doesn't really do much with the physics of the Pleiadians, Swaru's cosmic agency, recently in her Pleiadian history, it was saying, oh yes, by the way, this pyramid ain't going to work good unless you got a super duper ground underneath, and that water flow was necessary. The reason is because that charge cascade to ground is the voltage difference which begins the process of making a generator from what's called 0-point vacuum coherence energy. For example, you can take a pole, I don't know, like 300 meters high, and you take a pole and you put a little short wire at the top and compare that voltage to earth, good ground, and you got some power enough to light a very small light bulb. Well, that's the beginning of the clue. Now, if you tune that pole as a pyramid to a harmonic cascade, which is charge implosive, and then it begins to hum a little louder, the Hummer, the gravity diode. Now, if you put quartz, which is highly piezo at the top, with a thin film of gold, perfect dielectric on the outside of that, now suddenly you've got a big, big capacitor building very high voltage, and you're pumping that in. Now, you know all those pictures of where the pyramids were located, and let's do those pictures again. Here's the pyramids are all located at this dodecaecosa grid. That's the point, okay? And here's how that, we were supposed to play this is the film about how the short wave embeds the long wave, the Earth precessional spin with galactic wave, and this is about embeddability. See how the short wave and the long wave embed, and they start with orthogonal vectors. You need literally 4 directions, the cube of space, or you don't start phase conjugation in optics or Agnihotra. And this is just this little movie. We might as well play our movies here. This is the movie of embeddability. So notice icosa, dodeca, and inside that is the embeddable cube, and the cube is embedded by golden ratio, et cetera, et cetera. So that process of enabling charge embedding, the sexy word in physics today is entanglement. Entanglement perfected is called embeddability perfected, and that perfected, so the name of phase conjugation, is optimized by golden ratio precisely, which is the only possible fractal. So now you've got this pyramid on this dodecaecosa node generating this high voltage, pumping that wave, available for pickup everywhere there's an identical node. Now, this is where we get into the physics of stargates. This is the last intro physics before we do our galactic history story. You need to know what a portal is. Hello. Oh, really? Isn't that so? Are we going to do this for 5-year-olds? I think we should, because they need to know. It's as simple as lucid dreaming. Let me explain. We now know that, first of all, the ability to lucid dream, astral project, and remote view, which is to say get coherent longitudinally, the ba from the ka, predicts whether you'll take memory through death. And you understand the physics now if you've been listening to me. And we now have demonstrated with wonderful testimonial, and I credit Maya from the Therify project of Athens and Paris. Thank you, Maya. In the recent Therify blog, reporting in detail about the Therify plasma projective geometry, enabling lucid dreaming and telepathy. But I'm talking about lucid dreaming for the moment. So, intense Therify or bliss experience, measurably, documented, enables lucid dreaming. Okay. Lucid dreaming is to propagate coherently in a longitudinal array. That's the physics. That's called Hey Ave, where the breath of charge takes flight, heaven, or plains of Sharon, the infinite dielectric capacitive unpacking of the monatomic gold dodecahedron, the Hebrew name for heaven, plains of Sharon. It's literally an electron shell that went on forever. So if that array is fractal enough, then you are inhabiting the array with your consciousness. Now, you say, oh, I was talking to Jay Widener about this, Dave at the end of 2001 bumps into the monolith and says, there's thousands of them here. And later he could show up in anybody's TV set he wanted to. Why? Well, that's called inhabiting the array. Now, first, you must know the array must be fractal. It is a longitudinal EMF array. And you are already inhabiting an array. When they call the spark gaps between the axon and dendrite, that is an array, right? Well, you inhabit that array. That's not new information. That's old information. I have to charge my battery. 1 second. Okay, battery. So inhabiting an array is actually not new. The spark gap's called Indra's net. Inside your brain, the spark gap quantum hologram, which if it makes a plasma tornado, which is a vortex, then you can see. Remember, the kids who were trained to see without their eyes by relaxing into the bliss state, and we're measuring that with brainwaves, flameinmind.com/outer vision. Okay. So the kids who see without their eyes, they go into this bliss state, they make coherent alpha, and there's an alpha beta cascade up to gamma of golden ratio and octave harmonics. It's measurable, it's teachable, it's a trance bliss relaxed state. And then, now the kids can see without their eyes, they're closed, they're doing Rubik's Cube and all this cool stuff without their eyes, and seeing without their eyes for kids is famous all over the world. This is not new. The new information is the physics of how they're seeing without their eyes. Remember, Korotkov originally measured alpha to beta golden ratio was the major indicator of kids who could see without their eyes. But now we know much, much more thanks to Patrick, flameinmind.com/outer vision. And we believe that those same kids enabling that lucid longitudinal coherence will now be able to see elementals and nature spirits. And we're proving that. Because that longitudinal compressional interferometry is the elemental kingdom, and if we don't talk to them, they know we're drunk and our tornadoes will never get steered. So we damn well better get about the business of talking to our elementals. And we need to teach the kids, and that's what we're doing. Point being here, when the kids begin to see without their eyes, invariably you ask them, well, what's it like? What are you seeing through? They say, well, I see a little vortex tube open up inside, and then I look through that narrow tube, and then I can see without my eyes. Every one of these kids says the same thing. They're seeing through a vortex tube of compression. What does that tell us about the physics of the nature of vision and perception? It is the implosive compression vortex point of the plasma charged tornado where the waves are sorted into phase at the Planck threshold by implosive compression. That's called vision. That's why 30% of people who get up out of Therify report a sharpening of vision. We have the International Conference on Vision in the Therify blog. I did a whole 2-hour presentation on that. So, you have been inhabiting a net of fireflies, but it's been small. It's been inside your head. Well, when does the hologram inside your head embed and get leverage on the hologram outside your head? They're both holograms. You know, well, the difference is phase coherence, by the way. So it's not new for you to inhabit an array. That's old. What's new is for that array to get bigger. You know, when the maiden goes over Niagara Falls and dies, and her spirit for the Iroquois inhabits that falls for thousands of years. Why? Because she had the perfect entrance place to inhabit a charge array. Hey Ave. So that is the nodal array, and that array, not only is it power distribution, but it is simultaneously, obviously, information distribution. So what is a portal? Our last question for this segment. We know therapy and phase conjugate, implosive, broad spectral, pine cones, kissing noses, plasma induces lucid dreaming. It's a form of plasma projection, but it's low inertia. Now, if you made that same plasma implosion process even more broad spectral and more power dense, and you tuned the send point to the receive point accurately, and that's not simple. That is what a portal is, actually. It begins with a lucid dream. You know, Jodie Foster in Contact, they thought the dodeca was going to send her across the stars, and it said that she had a lucid dream, and they thought, oh, how disappointing. No, it was not a disappointment. The lucid dream is the beginning of the portal plasma projection. It's the physics of astral projection, except when it gains inertia. Now, you remember when Billy Meyer, one day the Palladian says, oh, you're emotionally upset, we can't beam you up the same way, and it got a whole lot more uncomfortable. Well, this process, I'll just have to pause this 1 second. This process depends on emotional stability. The ability, for example, Fractal, if you're upset and angry, you will not die well. Because you can't do implosive compression, and therefore you can't inhabit an array, heaven, as it were. So you sort your emotions only to what's shareable, and those can be implosively compressed, and you can be transported. Well, the same has to do with these arrays. That's why I think it's a bit sad when Randy Kramer and friends are talking about going through these portals, and they're not telling you about the emotional components. That if your emotions are serene and precise and evolved, you see, the charge distribution in that array is the physics of the collective unconscious, which is a DNA radio field effect, communion of saints, which has been collecting a library of electric field survival information data for 1 billion years. And you can't inhabit that array unless you can do the compression right, because you can't inhabit that distribution array without the phase discipline, which is measurable as pure intention. That's why when you measure heart coherence, which I invented how to measure, realheartcoherence.com, you measure heart coherence, your heart becomes a laser, and it's physically an excellent lie detector. What is the reason? Well, because it's a kinesiology measure. Because that is the definition of a shareable wave, and the climax form of coherence is obviously fractal and phase conjugate. So, this was our intro to the interstellar history. So when you understand some of these basics, the idea is in the next segment here that we would do a very short conversation about how the humanoids came to be here in what's called the Orion Wars, or the Wars of Expansion, and what our position is now. And if we understand even a little bit about some of those technologies, we can get a sense of what humans might be useful for in the big picture. Like, where is our leverage among ETs who are all, apparently, most of seemingly much more evolved than we are. So, you know, we're going to have to get real humble real fast. So we'd like to know our value. Also in terms of AI, which is the problem, the scourge of the galaxy, as it were. So we want to introduce that problem, the solution to that problem, as being the physics of becoming plasma projective, literally lucid dream coherent, bliss radiant, that physics is the meal ticket. That is the possibility of the humans to mean something in this big picture. Otherwise, and we're going to use the example of the agenda of the Pleiadians to understand this story. So, to be continued in the next phase will be the history story. Thank you.